Your Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's world premiere of a virtual informal conversation with the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Madame Michelle Bachelet, on the implications of the COVID-19 crisis on human rights around the world. I'm very grateful for the High Commissioner for having accepted my invitation in the midst of what many call the biggest challenge of our generation. I am also pleased and very grateful to all of you for your support in this endeavor and for your continued interest and engagement in the work of the Council. And I'm happy to say we have some 400 registrations for today, so there is a high level of interest and we are very happy about this. I wish to also thank UNOC and the Council Secretariat for making all the necessary arrangements for this virtual meeting. And since this is the first time we're doing such a meeting, I would like to ask you all to bear with us in the event of any technical hiccups, which I'm afraid we're not able to exclude. I wouldn't be surprised if one or the other thing would be very difficult, but I hope we'll manage. I would also like to ask for your understanding that we are unfortunately not in a position to provide interpretation today, even though we tried very hard. But there are some technical shortcomings which we were not able to sort out for today. We're still working on them and we hope to do better next time. Dear colleagues, more than 3 weeks have passed since we had to suspend the 43rd session, and most delegations and stakeholders are now working from home, relying on the brave new world of modern technologies. This is a challenge, but let us try to see it as an opportunity for being innovative and for thinking outside the box. The COVID-19 crisis is what some call a black swan. It has unexpectedly thrown the global community into uncharted waters. We're witnessing a disruption of societies and economies affecting every corner of the globe. A little later today, the UN Security Council will equally hold a virtual meeting on the subject matter, no doubt from a different angle. It is for us here in Geneva to look at the human rights impact of the COVID crisis, and it is evident in many ways. The Council's special procedures have been very active, publishing press releases and recommendations almost every day. They looked at the crisis from a variety of angles, raising everybody's awareness to the fact that the crisis is in a way a magnifying glass of human rights issues. Mandate holders have insisted, among other things, on increased risks for vulnerable people, older people, persons with disabilities, minorities, indigenous people, refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, internally displaced persons, detainees, homeless people, those living in poverty, or in regions where there was already a humanitarian crisis before. The mandate holders have also pointed out
This meeting is being recorded.
that there is a disproportionate risk for women, because in many cases they are the caregivers, they keep societies going in the crisis, and they are increasingly exposed to domestic violence. And a similar risk is also to be noted for children. We have seen that the usual problems with social media are even more apparent now. Fake news are as frequent as ever, but this time they can put lives into danger if they spread misleading information or counterfeit medical supplies. And hate speech specific to the pandemic has the potential of increasing discrimination and scapegoating. These days, societies have to make excruciating trade-offs between saving lives and livelihoods, between health on the one hand and privacy, as well as such rights as freedom of movement, of peaceful assembly on the other hand, and many more. So there's a lot on the Council's plate to analyze and discuss. As you know, the Bureau held its first virtual meeting on the 1st of April, and considered it of critical importance for the Council, first of all, to touch base again, and to come together virtually at least, in order to address the implications of the COVID crisis. We're very happy that we can hold this informal meeting with the High Commissioner today, and we, that is the whole Bureau, hope to organize more such informal events in the near future, as long as we can't have a fully fledged session of the Council. Before giving the floor to the High Commissioner now, I have to say a few words on registering for the list of speakers. I would like to invite representatives from states, and at this stage from states only, who wish to deliver a statement to press the raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. If you have already done so before the beginning of the meeting, your hands have been lowered because it doesn't work like that. You have to register now, raise your hands now, and the Secretariat will kindly draw up a list of speakers while the High Commissioner will be speaking, and I will then later on be using this list of speakers. Please note that only one person per delegation can register, and that should be the person who will then actually deliver the speech. NGO representatives will be given the possibility to take the floor at a later stage. NGOs wishing to take the floor are kindly requested to send an email to the following address: hrc@ohchr.org. And I repeat, NGO-hrc@ohchr.org. And since our meeting time is limited, I would like to ask all delegations to keep their interventions short and not to ask questions again which have already been answered in the first place. The High Commissioner has kindly accepted to stay a little longer if this is necessary, and I thank you very much for her generosity. And having said that, I will now cede the floor to her. Madam, you have the floor. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and good morning to all of you and excellencies, colleagues and friends. Well, indeed, this is an important meeting at a time that none of us might ever forget. The COVID-19 pandemic is generating suffering and damage in every region. It poses a far-reaching threat to human rights. As Secretary-General Guterres has warned, it threatens not only development, but also enhanced instability, enhanced unrest, and enhanced conflict. We do not know how the virus itself might evolve, or whether those affected will permanently be immune. We do not have complete data of who is being infected and developing the most severe symptoms, or whether there are links to contributory factors such as pollution. We do know that vital measures must be taken to upgrade health and social systems to ensure the greatest possible support to those most impacted by the epidemic. We know we cannot afford to leave anyone behind in this effort. And we know that lockdowns cannot continue forever. Exit strategies must be carefully devised to ensure our societies and people recover. So today we have come together for this informal meeting of the Council. Although we may be physically apart, I hope this contributes to the creation of a more cooperative, global and human rights-based approach to the crisis. All states are facing tremendous challenges. Many are demonstrating their commitment to protecting human rights through this epidemic. Others should be encouraged to do so in order to make their efforts to tackle COVID more effective for everyone, both in their nations and across the world. It is natural and necessary for national efforts to be a strong priority in any crisis. But this is a global pandemic, and only global solidarity will ensure that we can combat it effectively. This crisis makes clear how much we need collective international action and demonstrates the value of our multilateral organizations. The United Nations was created to prevent, mitigate, and more effectively address international crises. I urge all of us to work together to promote a strong multilateral, cooperative, and global approach. First, I want to address some urgent issues regarding economic and social rights. The pandemic is exposing the damaging impact of inequalities in every society. In developed countries, fault lines in access to health care, in labor rights and social protection, in living space and in dignity are suddenly very visible. In developing countries, where a large portion of the population may rely on daily income to survive, the impact could be far greater. The million of people who have little access to health care and who by necessity live in cramped conditions with poor sanitation, no safety net, no clean water, will suffer most. They are less likely to be able to protect themselves from the virus and less likely to withstand a sharp drop in income. Unchecked, the pandemic is likely to create even wider inequalities and amid extensive suffering. The universality of the threat from this virus provides the most compelling argument there has been ever for universal and affordable access to health care. Actions to upgrade public health care in every country are especially urgent. WHO is leading efforts to ensure that all countries are equipped to detect, test, trace, isolate, and treat people infected by COVID-19. This effort should be fully resourced. There will need to be a significant regional and global efforts to avoid the collapse of any country's medical system, a matter of urgent interest to everyone. Extensive economic and social measures must also be taken in every country to lessen the shocks of this epidemic and minimize the further growth of inequalities. The full impact of the pandemic on global and national economies has yet to be felt. Many states in every region, especially in Europe, have taken unprecedented measures to protect the right of workers and minimize the numbers of those made unemployed. All states with sufficient resources should be encouraged to do the same. Many developing countries have less capacity to absorb and mitigate the economic and social impact of the epidemic. They may also be most vulnerable to war recession through commodities pricing and a decline in foreign investment and of remittances, among other factors. The Secretary-General has called for measures including, but not limited to, debt alleviation, expanded access to funding through the IMF, and contributions to the Global Humanitarian Fund. We may also need to explore new financial mechanisms to fund global solidarity. Last week, the African Development Bank raised the world's largest social bond, a $3 billion fund to assist African governments to expand access to health and to other essential services and goods. This is precisely the kind of innovative thinking we need. I also want to emphasize the imperative of respect for civil and political rights during this crisis. Difficult decisions are facing many governments. Emergency measures may well be needed to respond to this public health emergency, but an emergency situation is not a blank check to disregard human rights obligations. Emergency measures should be necessary and proportionate to meet that need. People should be fully informed about the emergency measures and told how long they will remain in effect. The enforcement of emergency measures needs to be applied fairly and humanely. Any penalty should be proportional to the offense committed and laid down by law. I'm profoundly concerned by certain countries' adoption of emergency powers that are unlimited and not subject to review. In a few cases, the epidemic is being used to justify repressive changes to regular legislation, which will remain in force long after the emergency is over. I'm also concerned by steps taken to impose restrictions on media freedom and freedom of expression. Vaguely formulated actions to combat alleged misinformation could be applied to any criticism, and in some countries, we have already seen reports of journalists being penalized for reporting a lack of masks, health workers reprimanded for saying they lack protection, and ordinary people arrested for social media posting about the pandemic. Criticism is not a crime. I urge all governments to greatly increase access to accurate information and statistics. Transparency is paramount and can be life-saving in a health crisis. I also urge an end to any blanket internet and telecommunications shutdowns and denials of service. When members of military forces conduct law enforcement functions, they should be accountable to civilian authorities, and they remain subject to international human rights law. WHO strongly advises that health and social measures to combat COVID-19 be implemented with the full engagement of the public, because respect for human rights, including the right to speak up and to meaningfully participate in decisions, is an essential lever of successful public health policies. The only effective way to fight an epidemic is with the public's trust. What to do? I see two areas of action: the immediate response to the epidemic and the preparation of the recovery. Regarding the response, I want to share with you some action points that are immediately relevant and will assist in devising effective and humane policies. All national efforts should seek to mitigate the impact of the epidemic on women and on vulnerable groups. Women are more likely than men to work in low-wage and informal sectors without paid sick leave, health insurance, or social protection. Elderly women are also more likely than men to be subsisting without any form of pension. Confinement measures are creating additional burdens for many women, including the burden of caring for the sick, the elderly, and with children no longer attending school. Women and girls are also facing increased risk of domestic violence, as recent statistics from France and Spain have demonstrated. For purposes of remote schooling, girls globally have less access to internet and less cell phones than boys. So these impacts may not be immediately visible, but they could set back the cause of women's equality. Several high-risk and vulnerable groups require greater attention and mitigation measures at this time. They include people in places of detention and other institutions, including psychiatrist institutions or orphanage, people with disabilities, indigenous people and minorities, migrants, refugees, IDPs, people in conflict zones, and in particular, older people, especially those living alone or in institutions. Specific guidance on most of these areas has been issued or is in preparation. Notably, I refer you to our guidance regarding people in detention facilities, whose numbers should be carefully reduced, and to avoid an explosive spread of the virus in closed and overcrowded settings. Iran recently took action to release at least temporarily 40% of its prison population. Indonesia will also release prisoners accused of minor crimes, and so other countries. So I urge all states to release all those detained without a lawful basis, including those held in violation of human rights obligations. I'm also concerned that some countries envision prison sentences for violating orders on physical distancing. This is likely to exacerbate the epidemic. People with disabilities must often rely on others for help with daily tasks, and confinement regulation should ensure that support is available. Many migrants are at very high risk of contagion because of their living conditions and limited access to health care. I commend Portugal for taking action last week to temporarily grant all migrants in the country full citizenship rights to enable them to access all healthcare systems. Extensive measures must be taken in every country to absorb the economic and social shocks of this epidemic and to minimize the expansion of inequalities. Everywhere, the pandemic is likely to take a disproportionate toll on the poor. For example, information from the Catalan regional authorities in Spain indicates that residents of poorer neighborhoods may be 6 or 7 times more likely to contract the virus than people in richer areas. There is a strong need for governmental action to ensure income security, the protection of livelihood, and access to essential goods and services for the poorest members of the society. It is vital to prevent people from becoming homeless as a result of losing their jobs. Cash grants should be envisioned, alongside measures to ensure families can delay rental or loan payments and a halt to eviction. For the homeless and others without adequate housing, measures could include using short-term rentals and emergency accommodation. My office is currently compiling good economic and social practices adopted by countries in every region, many of them developing countries, and we will bring this to your attention. We will also be working to integrate human rights into all the work of the UN's economic and social programs. Protection of health workers and their adequate remuneration should be a paramount concern. To note, 70% of the world's health workers are women, many of whom may be facing the additional burdens I have noted. When an existential threat faces all of us, there is no place for nationalism or scapegoating, including of migrants and minority communities. There have been growing and unacceptable physical and verbal attacks of people of East Asia origin and members of other minorities, and action should be taken to combat this. And as a matter of fact, in many of our missions in African and MENA region, when people are from Western, they are also being blamed by the disease, and they also have been attacked and an object of hate speech. In every stage of this epidemic, including the recovery, efforts should be made to involve national human rights institutions, civil society activists, and human rights defenders. Those with long-standing involvement in economic and social rights, urban communities, and specific vulnerable groups, such as indigenous people, have gained many valuable lessons that can benefit all policymakers today. Any obstacle to medical efforts in one country heightens the risk for all of us. Sectoral sanctions which have negative impacts on healthcare and the human rights of vulnerable people should urgently be lifted or adapted. with effective humanitarian exemptions to ensure access to vital supplies. I commend the efforts underway to ensure the Human Rights Council can assist in a timely manner with COVID-related human rights concerns. Under your leadership, Madam President, the Council is resuming its work. In addition to this informal briefing, a series of e-meetings with various stakeholders is being planned, and I understand there are discussions regarding a special session on COVID-19. I have been grateful for the swift and pertinent analysis of many special procedures, mandate holders, and chairs of treaty bodies. Throughout the response and recovery stages of the epidemic, we must all step up and demonstrate global solidarity. In this context, I remind all states of the duty of international cooperation and assistance under Article 2 of the Convention of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Before concluding, I want to make a few remarks about recovery from the crisis. As the Secretary-General has highlighted, we must build back better. No country was prepared for this shock, which in every state has been exacerbated by inequalities, particularly in access to healthcare, social protection, and public services. The epidemic has clarified the need to increase our efforts to ensure that all people, including the most vulnerable, benefit from development. We need to redouble efforts to build more inclusive and sustainable economies and to shape societies that are more resilient in the face of shocks. The 2030 Agenda is fully mapped and universally approved. It remains our strongest tool. It should also be clear that protecting the environment, ensuring biodiversity, is the best way to protect human health and well-being, including from pandemics. Environmental degradation and biodiversity loss create the conditions for the type of animal-to-human zoonosis that has repeatedly resulted in viral epidemics. Not only COVID-19, if we remember SARS, MERS, and Ebola even, it's zoonosis. And so we need to ensure environment and biodiversity. We simply cannot return to where we are just a few months ago before COVID-19. This is a colossal test of leadership. It demands decisive, coordinated, and innovative action from all, for all. From all and for all. We are physically distant today, but we must stand together. All of you have received a letter informing you of the work being undertaken by my office in the context of COVID-19, and I will provide regular updates to you as the situation evolves. I take this opportunity to publicly thank all my staff for their continued determination and work at this challenging time. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Madam High Commissioner. Before I now give the floor to delegations, I would like to respond to some of the questions we have received in advance, which relate to the work of the Council. Delegations ask whether it would be possible to resume the 43rd session or to have the 44th session in June. And the answer is, unfortunately, there is still a lot of uncertainties at this stage, both in Switzerland and around the world. We're hopeful that we'll be able to resume and to organize the 44th session in person, but we are not really in a position to say anything about what will happen in 2 months' time in June. UNOC is in any case in regular contact with the Swiss authorities and will keep us all updated. They have, however, also highlighted that in all probability something like organizing big meetings like the Human Rights Council belongs to the last steps that will be taken in the long process of coming back to business as usual. The Bureau agreed in any case on the 1st of April on the need to examine every option for resuming the Council and for the decision-making of the Council if the Council were not able to resume its normal work. The Bureau also noted that it would be premature to take any decision at this point in time, but discussions will be continued and the Bureau will meet every 2 weeks at least and will make sure that all the options will be examined and that everybody, all the stakeholders will be updated and that decisions will be taken in close consultation with all the stakeholders. Some delegations wanted to know whether we'll have to practice social distancing when we come back and whether we'll have to meet in room, rather than in room 20 in the Assembly Hall. Again, we do not really know, but it is quite likely that we'll have to continue practicing social distancing and that we'll therefore have to move to the Assembly Hall. We have already done this before suspending the meeting. We have seen that the Assembly Hall serves the purpose. If necessary, decisions can be taken by votes by a roll call. Please don't forget that the Assembly Hall used to be the venue of the Human Rights Council before we had room 20. We might have to go back during the crisis. We will in any case have to hold Human Rights Council meetings in the Assembly Hall once the restoration work has started in room 20. And having said that, I will now proceed with the interactive dialogue and give the floor to speakers who have asked for it. The first on my list is the EU, followed by Azerbaijan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and it's good to see you on the screen. It's also good to see you on the screen, Madam High Commissioner. Even if it's on the screen, I would prefer to see you in person, but okay. Madam President, the EU welcomes very much this informal briefing, and we thank very much also the High Commissioner not only for her briefing, but also for a letter on her office's initial plan to COVID-19, including embedding human rights in the broader UN response. While we are working and doing everything we can to combat the virus in Europe, we agree very much that this is a time for solidarity and for cooperation. So the EU supports international cooperation and multilateral solutions in this crisis and is working to secure financial support to partner countries. Wait, I'll start my video. And is working to secure financial support to partner countries for more than 20 billion euros. All measures taken must be indeed in accordance with international law, including human rights. In our response also, we will continue to promote and uphold good governance, human rights, the rule of law, gender equality and non-discrimination, but also decent working conditions as well as fundamental values and humanitarian principles. High Commissioner, we need to act swiftly on health, on social, on economic, on humanitarian aspects, while maintaining a human rights-based approach to all our actions. The EU will put its full weight behind the UN Secretary-General's UN-wide response, and you can count on our support in ensuring the centrality of human rights in these global efforts. The EU is indeed a staunch advocate of having human rights at the front and center of UN's work, with inclusive decision-making involving also the civil society and access to information being key elements. Only by adopting a human rights-based approach can we guarantee an effective response and ensure that no one is left behind. Madam High Commissioner, as you have pointed out, response measures should adhere to human rights standards, including limiting restrictions on human rights to what is strictly necessary and proportionate to the evaluated risk. Your office mandate is, of course, of utmost importance in advising governments in that their response plans are indeed people-centered and uphold the dignity and human rights of all without discrimination of any kind. In that regard, could you please maybe elaborate a little bit on how we can ensure gender-responsive measures as well as strategies to adequately address the risks of those in most vulnerable situations, including, of course, the Secretary-General's global response plan. I thank you very much, and thanks also, Madam President, for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now give the floor to Azerbaijan, to be followed by China and then Korea.
Okay, thank you so much, Madam President.
Please put on your video.
1 minute. Okay, thank you so much, Madam President, for giving me the floor, and I would like to thank you for this initiative to organize this meeting. And I also would like to thank the distinguished High Commissioner for her presentation and for information that the office has been providing to the delegations in the recent period. The COVID-19 pandemic has caught almost everybody unprepared, and lack of proper attention by international human rights platforms to economic and social rights and to relevant international cooperation in this important field are among the fields, the factors exacerbating the devastating impact of the COVID-19 throughout the world, both in the development developed and the developing countries. In this regard, distinguished High Commissioner, could you please elaborate on possible measures that need to be taken to foster an environment of global solidarity and international cooperation in face of this unprecedented health crisis, including also through introducing at a later stage probably adjustments and corrections to the post-pandemic daily work of the office and HRC. Another issue is that, as it has been widely mentioned in the international press, as well as in the High Commissioner's recent statements and those made by some special procedures, unilateral coercive measures are deeply constraining the efforts of affected countries in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. In this regard, so the question is as follows. Could you please elaborate on the human rights aspects of the impact of these measures on global response to the pandemic, in particular on access to medicines, equipment, and other related medical materials, as well as on the emergency medical cooperation program? Thank you so much, Madam High Commissioner, and I would also like to thank the President of the Council for giving me the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now give the floor to China, followed by Korea and the Netherlands, and maybe I can invite countries which are being told that they will get the floor in the near future to already start switching on the video. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you so much to organize this video conference. I wish to appreciate the presentation made by Madam High Commissioner. It's very timely and it's imperative and high time for the international community to act with solidarity and cooperation to cope with the spread of this virus. We wish to emphasize the following points. Firstly, we need to continue make efforts to protect people's right to life and the right to health. In this regard, unilateral sanctions posted on some developing countries should be lifted as soon as possible. Secondly, we need to take effective measures to minimize the pandemic's impact on social and economic development so as to guarantee people's rights in this respect. Efforts should also to be made to ensure the rights of women, children, the elderly, the disabled, migrants, and other vulnerable groups. Thirdly, we need to jointly oppose stigmatization and politicization of public health issues. Practices relating to the racial discrimination and xenophobia should be abandoned. Madam President, China will continue to support international cooperation against the pandemic, with the World Health Organization playing the leading role and the coordinating role. We also welcome Madam High Commissioner and her office to make contributions to the international efforts within their mandate. Madam President, facing the COVID-19 outbreak, China has mobilized the whole nation, set up collective control and treatment mechanism, and acted with openness and transparency. With tremendous efforts, the Chinese people fought through the most difficult time and now we are speeding up the restoration of normal life and work. China has taken an active part in international efforts against the outbreak. President Xi Jinping attended the extraordinary G20 summit and has spoken with over 20 heads of states or international organizations over the phone. We express China's willingness to share its expertise and experiences, and we are ready to continue to provide support and assistance to those countries in need. We will continue to work together with others to win the final victory against COVID-19, so as to ensure the well-being of the people of all countries. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I now pass the floor to the Ambassador of Korea, to be followed by the Netherlands and then the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam President. We are now facing an unprecedented crisis that requires extraordinary measures to be taken, but we should never forget to place human rights at the center of our response. I would like to thank the High Commissioner for raising her voice on this issue through public interventions. This crisis is bringing even greater difficulties to the vulnerable groups in our societies, which should not be missed or excluded. We should also work together to push back against the growing trend of stigmatization, discrimination, racism, and xenophobia. In our fight against COVID-19, new digital technologies and medical innovations are increasingly being used to detect, trace, and monitor patients, as well as to provide information to the public in a timely manner. These technologies can be used to protect the right to life and health, while taking an approach that's the least intrusive to other human rights, such as the freedom of movement, freedom of expression, and right to privacy. In closing, I would like to note that the Republic of Korea is fighting against the virus on the basis of transparency, openness, and democratic values. In the spirit of solidarity, we are ready to share our best practices, information, and lessons learned with the global community. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of the Netherlands, to be followed by the Russian Federation and then Iran.
Thank you, Madam President. The Netherlands aligns itself with the EU statements, and I want to thank you and High Commissioner Bachelet for convening this virtual informal briefing. In this global crisis, the UN's human rights voice needs to be loud and clear. It's essential that we find creative ways to continue our human rights work amidst the current crisis, which has many human rights angles. The current crisis knows no borders and will undoubtedly have long-term social and economic consequences. We can only defeat this crisis through effective international cooperation and real solidarity under the leadership of a strong United Nations. Human rights protection needs to be our collective guiding principle. Madam High Commissioner, we strongly support your office's action with regard to the COVID-19 response as set out in your letter. OHCHR must play a central role in integrating and protecting a human rights-based approach in the UN-wide response to the pandemic. You also have a key role to play in monitoring and guiding government responses to the current crisis. The human rights implications of this crisis are twofold: direct human rights challenges arising from the health crisis and intended or unintended consequences of government measures taken to stop the spread of the virus for the protection of human rights. This includes negative impacts on the freedom of expression or the position of vulnerable persons, including women, religious minorities, or LGBTI persons. And in addressing the health crisis, it is paramount to ensure that derogations of certain human rights are fully in compliance with international human rights standards, and that such temporary restrictions meet all the criteria of the Syracuse principles. Madam High Commissioner, could you elaborate on the role of your office in monitoring government responses? I thank you, Madam President, and I wish all the states all the best with addressing these difficult challenges ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I now give the floor to the Russian Federation, to be followed by Iran and then the Philippines.
I thank you very much, Madam President, for holding this meeting. And I would like, first of all, to thank the High Commissioner for delivering this briefing. Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, distinguished colleagues, the global crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic helps us to reveal what matters most. Our world is indeed small and interdependent. This is why humane approach in relations between people and between countries, as well as international solidarity in the face of this common threat and challenge, is so vital today. Recognizing the leading role that the states and the WHO play in combating the pandemic, the Russian Federation would like to welcome the efforts taken by the High Commissioner and the OHCHR to assist states in addressing challenges and impacts of coronavirus pandemic on different strata of life, and in particular on the most vulnerable strata of society. We also support the steps that have been taken by the General Assembly in adopting a relevant resolution. However, we note with regret that authors left behind a number of absolutely critical issues which need to be urgently addressed. It was just one of the reasons why Russia put forward a draft declaration of solidarity of the United Nations in the face of challenges posed by the COVID-19. Regrettably, a small group of states championing unilateral coercive measures-based policy appeared unwilling to respond to the call of the UN Secretary-General and refused to put aside politicized approach and blocked the initiative. This is regrettable, to say the least. Madam High Commissioner, in the OHCHR COVID-19 guidance, many different issues are mentioned, but unilateral coercive measures are unfortunately not, although you briefly referred to them during your presentation. I would like to stress once again that unilateral coercive measures clearly undermine countries' capacity to respond to the challenges, including human rights ones, caused by the pandemic. It is clearly reflected in recent statements of a number of Human Rights Council special proceedings, as well as the Committee on the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, to which I would like to draw everybody's attention. In this regard, we would like to ask you, Madam High Commissioner, to continue to pay close attention to this issue and to add the relevant passages to the guidance. The second issue, as previous speakers already mentioned, is an unprecedented way of racist and xenophobic rhetorics. We would like to ask you, Madam High Commissioner, to exercise all efforts to counter it. In conclusion, Madam High Commissioner, I would like to stress that the Russian Federation will continue its coordination with all relevant stakeholders in combating the COVID-19 and its consequences, including human rights ones. We hope all interested countries will join us, and we will continue to engage in practical cooperation on all tracks in this matter. I thank you very much, and I would like to thank the President of the Human Rights Council for facilitating this meeting.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Iran, to be followed by the Philippines and then Brazil. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam High Commissioner. Thank you, Madam President. You both talked about vulnerable groups of society who might be hit the hardest by the coronavirus outbreak. You both urged for global solidarity and global action, and that we cannot afford to leave anyone behind. I would like to underline the crucial fact that close to 25% of the world population that are targeted by unilateral sanctions of some sort should also be counted as among the most vulnerable. As you, Madam High Commissioner, mentioned in the OHCHR press release dated 24 March 2020, and I quote, "It is vital to avoid the collapse of any country's medical system." And you also added that both for global public health reasons and to support the rights and lives of millions of people in these countries, sectoral sanctions should be eased or suspended. In a context of global pandemic, impeding medical efforts in one country heightens the risk for all of us, end of quote. My delegation would like to know what follow-up initiatives or measures have been taken by OHCHR to advance this critical call, which has also been made by the UNSG and many other authoritative bodies worldwide. What are your recommendations for the Council and other human rights treaty bodies and mechanisms to follow up on this issue? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of the Philippines, to be followed by Brazil and then Sweden.
Thank you, Madam President and Madam High Commissioner. The Philippines welcomes this opportunity to share information and exchange views on addressing the human rights impact of the COVID pandemic in line with the proactive letter of our High Commissioner last month. The Philippines has launched a $3.9 billion emergency cash and non-cash subsidy program, considered as the largest and widest in Philippine history, to benefit 18 million low-income households, and has rolled out $542 million worth of economic package for affected workers and establishments, farmers and fisherfolks, and small and medium-scale enterprises. Further measures are being put in place to respond to the pandemic's wide-ranging impact. In light of the global emergency appeals, the Philippine President has approved the Philippine donation of $100,000 to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies for COVID-19. Even before the call of the UN Secretary-General for a global ceasefire, the Philippine president had declared on March 18 a unilateral ceasefire against the terrorist CPP-NPA-NDF group. Unfortunately, the CPP-NPA-NDF has violated and exploited the ceasefire with their continued murderous attacks and political agitation to cause uncertainty and destabilization. We are happy that the High Commissioner has recognized the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on developing countries and on the situation of vulnerable groups, including migrants and refugees. This global cross-cutting emergency has sharpened the demand for greater inclusivity, synergy, and relevance in the work of multilateral fora and will test the effectiveness of global compacts on migration and refugees. We underscore the imperative of ensuring that our actions are geared towards strengthening the Council as a platform for effective real-world transformations through international sharing and open dialogue, constructive cooperation, technical cooperation, and capacity building. Thank you, Madam President and High Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Brazil, to be followed by Sweden and then Iraq.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam High Commissioner, for keeping us connected. All of our nations are now being confronted with the difficult task of protecting lives, guaranteeing human rights, and upholding our economies. COVID-19 is challenging human rights of everyone, everywhere. Health systems have near collapsed in many countries. Without enhancing our preparedness to health emergencies and building resilience into our health systems, we will not survive either this or future pandemics. Much less we will be able to uphold everyone's human rights to health, particularly those in dire need. We are deeply concerned with the difficulties in obtaining essential medical supplies to fight COVID-19 due to export restrictions and other measures. Access to these goods will determine who lives and who dies. That is simple as that. It is imperative then that we guarantee availability of access to treatments, vaccines, and all medical products in an equitable manner and at an affordable price. I believe this is the present pandemic's phase of inequality, and I wonder if Madam High Commissioner could elaborate on this. Economic rights are also being threatened. Measures to preserve the economy, support businesses, and address the staggering rates of unemployment are underway in several countries, including Brazil. We must do our best to limit the impact of this health emergency on people's livelihoods. Finally, Madam High Commissioner, we share your concerns with regard to vulnerable people. In these extraordinary times, they deserve extraordinary measures and attentions. Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to address our common challenges in fighting the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Sweden, to be followed by Iraq and then Bangladesh.
Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, I have the honor of speaking on behalf of the Nordic Baltic countries, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, and my own country, Sweden. We thank the High Commissioner and express our full support for the work carried out by her office, by special procedures mandate holders, and by treaty bodies. The COVID-19 pandemic is a test of our societies, of governments, of communities, of individuals, and of the UN system itself. We express our deepest sympathies to all those affected, and we stand in solidarity with all countries and societies concerned. In this unprecedented situation, it is legitimate for states to adopt extraordinary measures to protect their citizens, but all responses must be in accordance with international law, including full respect for human rights, and should be guided by the principles of non-discrimination, equality, democracy, gender equality, the rule of law, and should be limited in time. We must ensure transparency of actions and equitable and effective responses to tackling both the immediate health crisis and the socio-economic consequences, mindful of our common commitment of leaving no one behind. We must also protect human rights defenders, journalists, and media workers, and the critical work they do to hold us, governments, accountable. Any use of emergency powers and tools of surveillance technology to track the spread of COVID-19 must be in line with international law. For too many women and children, lockdowns and restrictions increase their vulnerability to violence. We strongly support the call of the Secretary-General to make gender equality and the prevention and redress of violence against women a key part of national response plans for COVID-19. Madam High Commissioner, you have addressed some of the areas or many areas already, but in your view, what is the major challenges of the COVID pandemic for human rights, gender equality, democracy, and the rule of law? I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now give the floor to Iraq, to be followed by Bangladesh and then Australia.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the High Commissioner for the information express our grave at the number of victims of COVID-19 and our sincere sympathy with their families. At the same time, we wish the speedy recovery of all patients and would like to underline the following. Number one, the importance of international cooperation and solidarity in responding to this global health crisis called for by the UN Secretary-General and WHO Director-General in terms of information sharing, emergency aid, prevention and control of the pandemic, and to provide technical and advisory assistance to states that do not have possibility for face and control the pandemic and treating their patients. Second, everyone should receive the same level of medical care without any discrimination. Number three, budget has been allocated to limit the spread of implications that maybe affect other human rights obligations. So the High Commission, treaty bodies and the special procedures should consider this challenge when they monitor states' obligations during this time. Finally, Madam President, the Iraqi government has taken all the necessary measures through its security and health institutions in the fight against this pandemic. Also, a flight were allocated to evacuate Iraqi citizens in some countries abroad. And also would like to thank all states that have provided assistance to Iraq. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Bangladesh, to be followed by Australia and then India. You have the floor, sir. Ambassador, we can't hear you. Ambassador from Bangladesh will try a little later, and now the next on my list would be the Ambassador of Australia. I hope this will work. Please go ahead, madam.
They might be muted, Madam President.
There's somebody over here who can speak. If Australia is there, yeah, Australia should speak.
Australia, we cannot hear you. I can see the ambassador speak, but I didn't hear her.
I think you should move to the next one, which is India, and then ask Australia and Bangladesh to check with we can see India. So
Ambassador of Australia, unfortunately we can't hear you. Can we try the Ambassador of India? We have already had you on the screen, so maybe we can hear you.
Can you hear me, please? Just to let you know that there are 3 dots at the right-hand side of the screen, which you have to click, and then you get the option of unmuting the audio. Perhaps that's what my colleagues could do. But if I may start my statement then. Thank you. Madam President, thanks are due to you and the High Commissioner for this informal conversation, which is both necessary and timely as we face a great global crisis from the COVID-19 pandemic. Tackling this threat requires all-out efforts and solidarity at the national, regional, and global level by all stakeholders. The crisis has thrown up multidimensional challenges for us, from the immediate containment of the pandemic to tackling the economic fallout, especially in the post-pandemic phase. India's focus is to contain the spread of COVID-19 by adopting the required measures while, at the same time, doing our best to ameliorate the situation of those affected, particularly the marginalized and the poor, especially women, children, and migrant labor. Hence, the government has provided a US $24 billion assistance package that seeks to save lives as well as livelihoods. However, the sheer magnitude of the crisis demands a collective and collaborated regional as well as global response. In addition to its contribution of US $10 million to the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC, COVID-19 response fund, India is keeping a rapid response team of doctors and specialists on standby for assisting SAARC member states. We're also extending online training capsules for emergency response teams and are ready to share with SAARC member states the integrated disease surveillance portal to better trace possible virus carriers. The need of the hour is to make concerted efforts to overcome this existential threat. The introspection, analysis, and or prognosis would come in the post-COVID-19 scenario that would also need to address the expected socio-economic fallout. Currently, the UN system, including OHCHR, needs to play a positive role by supplementing national efforts in every possible manner in accordance with the respective mandates. Thank you, Madam President, and wishing everyone good health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. My list now reads as follows for the next few speakers: Bangladesh, then Australia, Marshall Islands, Syria, and Germany. And I will try again now with the Ambassador of Bangladesh. You have the floor, sir. I'm sorry, Ambassador, we can't hear you. Can we try the Ambassador of Australia, please?
We put them at the end.
Ambassador will try later, but we can see that you are muted at the moment. We'll now try with the Marshall Islands. Are you there? Marshall Islands?
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, Excellencies. The Marshall Islands extends its sympathies to those who are suffering due to COVID-19. We have closed our own borders and effectively quarantined the whole nation since mid-February. We took these drastic measures because we knew that our communities would be particularly vulnerable if the coronavirus reached our islands. Thanks to these early preventative measures, we have avoided enacting many of the restrictions now commonplace around the world. Acting early and with transparency is crucial to effectively managing crises, and we are concerned by governmental hesitation and obfuscation in the face of the current pandemic. We urge UN organizations to prioritize human health over political considerations and to include all governments and territories in critical international discussions. Nearly every nation must now chart a path forward that both protects public health and affirms basic human rights. As we look for solutions, we must be mindful of fundamental freedoms. Concerns about overreaching restrictions and indefinite suspensions of rights must not be ignored, especially when less restrictive and viable alternatives exist. Likewise, COVID responses must not justify or exacerbate pre-existing systematic rights abuses. It is too early to fully understand the extent to which the world will change as a result of this crisis, but it is evident that heightened leadership will be needed to maintain global political order. Together, we must continue to pursue multilateral cooperation for the sake of protecting our most vulnerable populations. Madam President, for these reasons, we ask you to consider the opinion of the Advisory Committee on responding to the pandemic from a human rights-based approach. I thank you, Madam President, Madam High Commissioner. Komoltada.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Syria.
Yes, can you hear me, please? Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Madam High Commissioner, for this briefing and for your introductory statements. The evolving catastrophic impacts of COVID-19 is expected to have immediate and longer-term socio-economic effects on all countries, particularly on developing countries. Governments continue to take measures at the national level to combat the spread of the disease, but there remains an urgent need to ensure that they do have adequate supplies of medical equipment to contain the spread of the virus and to mitigate with its impact. To this end, solidarity and cooperation at the international level remains indispensable. At this juncture, the continued application of economic and financial unilateral coercive measures is having a destructive impact on national health capacity in targeted countries and on their effective response, especially in relation to the procurement and the provision of urgently needed medical equipment and supplies to treat their population. Additionally, UCMs which are undermining basic human rights and socio-economic development in targeted countries are adversely affecting also essential humanitarian cooperation with international organizations, as stated by several international humanitarian agencies recently. There were statements recently, including today by you, Madam High Commissioner, and by some special procedures calling for lifting or suspending sectoral sanctions. We welcome those calls, and my question is, how are those calls going to be incorporated under the 5 areas of focus referred in your letter, Madam High Commissioner, of 31st of March, so that they can become a catalyst to serve their purpose? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I will now give the floor to Germany, followed by Bulgaria and Venezuela. We are trying to get in contact in the meantime with the ambassadors of Bangladesh and Australia so as to sort out the problems. Ambassador of Germany, you have the floor.
Commissioner, Germany aligns itself with the EU statement. I would like to thank both of you as well as UNOC for organizing this informal briefing. Germany shares the view that states in the global fight against COVID must now more than ever adopt a human rights-based approach. We believe it is extremely important that the work of the Geneva-based human rights mechanisms continues as much as possible despite the current difficult circumstances. We welcome the valuable work done so far by the High Commissioner and OHCHR, such as the guidelines on COVID-19 and human rights, as well as the many appeals published recently by special procedure mandate holders. My delegation also believes that the Council, as the global voice of human rights, cannot and should not remain silent in the current crisis. It is important that the Council should, as soon as possible, find a technical, feasible way to publicly reconfirm the importance of basic human rights principles in all efforts to stop the spread of the COVID-19 virus. A way to achieve this might be a resolution of the Council or a presidential statement. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Bulgaria.
Thank you, Madam President. Bulgaria aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union. We thank the President of the Human Rights Council for the opportunity to engage with the High Commissioner on this important issue. The fight against this global pandemic, which is taking so many lives and challenging the functioning of our societies, is an unprecedented challenge that requires global unity, cooperation, solidarity, and compassion. We also thank the High Commissioner for her availability and for the openness and transparency of her office. We took note of the letter sent by the High Commissioner last week and would like to congratulate the OHCHR for the leadership in setting up the initial action plan in response to the crisis caused by COVID-19. We need to see more examples of positive interaction with and among states, and where possible, to learn more about existing good practices in fighting the consequences of this unprecedented crisis around the world. In this context, we would be interested to hear of any plans on updates to be shared on a regular basis through the dedicated web space of the OHCHR. Madam High Commissioner, we are also interested to know in which areas the states would be most supportive to the ongoing work of the office. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now give the floor to Venezuela, followed by Austria, Georgia, and Malaysia. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank you for convening this virtual informal meeting. And I also thank High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet for her important and instructive presentation. The world is undergoing a crucial time in the history of humanity facing the COVID-19 pandemic, which affects of all and that daily highlights the urgent need for international cooperation and solidarity among all the nations. This problematic situation forces us to take adequate measures to prevent the spread and save the most amount of lives possible. No efforts can be nationally, regionally, and internationally. It is of utmost importance to give a multilateral approach to the answers that the community of nations must adopt together to minimize the severe effect of the pandemic. So far, the Venezuelan government has acted responsibly by adopting timely prevention measures to contain the spread of the coronavirus. Nevertheless, we must recognize that this is quite difficult, if not impossible, for us, the countries that face an imposition of unilateral coercive measures, which are illegal and a flagrant violation of both international law and the Charter of the United Nations. Along with the call made by the Secretary-General of the Special Rapporteur on unilateral coercive measures has also asked for the immediate lifting of these illegal sanctions that undermine the capacity of our countries to respond to the pandemic, including those that hinder the financing from purchasing medications, medical equipment, food, and other essential goods. The government of the United States insists on maintaining its policy of harassment of strangulations against the Venezuelan people with the imposition of illegal sanctions that hinder the ability of our government to, among others, have regular access to the international financial system or to free trade, thus undermine ongoing efforts of a national government to attack the COVID-19. Madam High Commissioner, in your peace release dated 24th of March, you expressed that these sanctions should be mitigated or suspended for public health reasons and to reinforce the right to defend the lives of millions of people. In this regard, we would like to know what initiative your office is taking to demand the effectiveness of this urgent call. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now pass the floor to my colleague from Austria, to be followed by Georgia, Malaysia, and then Palestine.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 16 member states of the Group of Friends of the Safety of Journalists. A longer version of this statement in the name of the Group of Friends in Geneva, New York, Paris, and Vienna will soon be published. Free, independent, and pluralistic media play an indispensable role in informing the public during the ongoing COVID-19 crisis. We see with great concern an increase in restricting measures taken by states that disproportionately limit the right to freedom of expression and impede journalists and media workers from reporting on the COVID-19 crisis. Arrests, persecution, and harassment against journalists and media workers, expulsion of foreign correspondents due to their COVID-19 coverage, as well as smear campaigns to discredit the work of journalists and the criminalization of alleged misinformation online and offline may constitute human rights violations. It is crucial for societies and the international community as a whole that governments preserve a free, safe, and enabling environment for journalists and media workers, and ensure that they can report on COVID-19 and inform about responses and consequences without undue interference. Madam High Commissioner, you referred to criticism is not a crime. We fully support that. We would encourage your office to offer guidance to governments on their human rights obligations in regard to safeguarding freedom of expression and freedom of the media during the ongoing crisis. Could you share with us your observations regarding the most serious threats to freedom of the media and expression during this global crisis and the consequences thereof? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And I now pass the floor to the Ambassador of Georgia, to be followed by Malaysia, Palestine, and then Slovenia. And the list of speakers is closed now. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I hope you hear me and watching. Thank you again. I highly appreciate you personally, Madam President, for convening this meeting and this opportunity, and of course, Madam Bachelet for her very interesting and very useful briefing. I'm sure that this is very useful and very timely as well for this very hard period of time for everybody. As you know, Georgia has taken a whole number of actions prior to the first confirmed case of COVID-19 in our country. So the first case was detected on the territory of the country in 26th of February. I will not go deep into the details which kind of measures has been taken by my country, but Georgia, as you know, is one of the promoters in the region in tackling of coronavirus. Due to last update, until now we have 214 cases in Georgia with total 3 deaths so far. But at the same time, we are parallelly working very seriously with international financial organizations and economically with global foundations in the world for the future measures. We are working with the EBRD, ADB. We are very thankful to European Union for their very swift and unequivocal support, financial support for all these measures. Georgia welcomes the efforts of the United Nations family to assist member states fight COVID-19 and actively cooperates with all UN institutions. As you know, pursuant to Article 4 of ICCPR, Georgia has immediately notified the Secretary-General of the United Nations that Georgia exercises the right of derogation from its obligations under the ICCPR in the entire territory of Georgia. Last but not least, Madam President, I would like to draw your attention and international community on human rights situation in conflict-affected and occupied regions where legitimate governments are deprived to exercise effective control, deserve the particular importance as population residing in those regions are most vulnerable towards the pandemic. This is in both Georgian regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. In this regard, I would like to know High Commissioner's view and vision and practical steps of her office in order to reach out to residents of the occupied regions and ensure their urgent need for receiving basic humanitarian and human rights assistance, including but not limited to right to health and guarantee. Thank you very much again, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, Ambassador. And we now turn to Malaysia, followed by Palestine, Slovenia, and then the United Kingdom. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, Excellencies. Malaysia stands in solidarity with the international community in fighting the coronavirus pandemic. A holistic global response is extremely crucial to address the far-reaching impacts of this pandemic. Our global responses must be robust and specifically targeted to address the immediate health crisis and the resulting humanitarian needs. On our part, the government of Malaysia has sanctioned multifaceted programs, including efforts to mitigate socio-economic impacts, especially on the most vulnerable groups. We are also working closely with our neighbors bilaterally with regional and international organizations, namely ASEAN and WHO, to further enhance coordination and cooperation to control the spread of COVID-19. We believe that strengthened cooperation and sharing of good practices are instrumental for all of us to recover from the aftermath of this pandemic. Equitable access to treatment and livelihood must be given utmost priority. Malaysia will support all efforts, including those to be led by High Commissioner Bachelet, towards this end. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And I now pass the floor to Palestine, by Slovenia, and then the United Kingdom, and then South Africa. You have the floor, Palestine.
Thank you, Madam President, and we also thank the High Commissioner for her important briefing. The State of Palestine would like to extend its sincere solidarity and convey deepest condolences to all bereaved families and countries on the tragic loss of life caused by COVID-19. Even as the COVID-19 pandemic brings regular activities to a standstill in many parts of the world, armed conflict and other situations of violence continue to exact the heavy toll on vulnerable communities. To people already living in volatile security conditions, the spread of this disease poses an additional threat to their lives. In this regard, we support the call made by the Secretary-General for a global ceasefire. Regrettably, in occupied Palestine, Israel is occupying power, exploiting the state of emergency and lockdown to accelerate its illegal settler colonization plans. Military raids in Palestinian areas have continued, as have Israeli settler attacks on Palestinian civilians. Detention of Palestinian volunteers for disinfecting public facilities in numerous instances, undermining efforts to combat this pandemic. Gaza already faced dire humanitarian and socio-economic conditions with a 13-year illegal Israeli blockade, which makes the situation even harder to contain COVID-19. Those acts reflect the regular and constant abuse and harassment inflicted by the Israeli occupying forces on vulnerable Palestinian communities to drive them out of their homes and make way for legal annexation. Moreover, these actions clearly violate international law, especially during a health crisis, including in Article 56 of the First Geneva Convention. And our growing concern for Palestinian prisoners and detainees during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic grows out of the systematic and routine denial of access to adequate medical treatment inside Israeli detention centers. Well, in this regard, we would like to ask the High Commissioner for the following. Our first question, what's the office doing to mitigate the effects of COVID-19 on the most vulnerable communities, including refugee communities and people under situation of armed conflict, including occupation and blockade? And our second question, what's the office doing to ensure the health of Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli detention centers, particularly those vulnerable to COVID-19? I thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Slovenia, followed by the United Kingdom, South Africa, and Pakistan.
Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, Slovenia would like to thank you for today's first ever virtual information conversation. We recognize the international community finds itself in an unprecedented situation, which indeed calls for extraordinary response. My delegation fully aligns itself with the statement delivered by the EU. We're closely monitoring the developments around the world and in the neighboring countries and taking decisive steps to contain the spread of COVID-19. Several strict measures to curb the spread of infections had to be adopted also in our country. As we tackle this pandemic, it is essential to be able to access best possible information which can lead to making informed decisions. In this regard, we are grateful for all the information conveyed to member states through the OHCHR, including its website. We thank you for stressing the impact this virus has had on vulnerable groups or on groups in vulnerable situations, especially its impact on women. However, as one of the countries emphasizing the consequences of demographic changes within UN fora, we would like to use this opportunity to stress special vulnerability of older persons, since they are as a group facing the highest risk during the COVID-19 pandemic. We thank you for mentioning that already in your introductory statement. We're wondering if the OHCHR has already reviewed some of the measures taken by UN member states and is able to share best practices already at this stage. Furthermore, we would like to thank you for the announcement of technical guidance notes on this and other issues. Let me reiterate, we must collectively ensure the UN system does not fail to respond to the rights and needs of older persons as a group at particular risk. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to the Ambassador of the United Kingdom, followed by South Africa, Pakistan, and then Liechtenstein. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, High Commissioner, first of all, thank you for taking this initiative and arranging today's informal briefing. I'd like to take this opportunity to express my sympathies and condolences to friends and colleagues in Geneva whose countries have been so seriously affected, and also to express my thanks for the expressions of support following the hospitalization of our Prime Minister. With your permission, I'd like to make 3 points this morning. First, I want to reiterate the United Kingdom's support to the United Nations, its funds, programs and agencies in their effort to tackle these enormous health and humanitarian challenges. We've never been faced with such a comprehensive and collective challenge as this global pandemic. We'll only get through it together. The United Kingdom has already provided $900 million to the United Nations to fight COVID-19, and we will provide more. Second, while states are rightly focused on doing everything necessary to bring this pandemic under control in their own countries, in line with WHO guidance, we need to be alive to the wider consequences of our actions and the need to minimize the long-term damage to our economies, our societies, and our politics. We're already facing the prospect of the worst global recession of our lifetime as a result of the measures we are taking, with all the consequences for people's lives around the world, particularly the poorest and most vulnerable, as many this morning have said. Which brings me to my third point. As you have said, we should seek to ensure that the measures we take are proportionate, that they're time-bound and transparent, and that they're regularly reviewed. Scrutiny of our actions as governments and international agencies has never been more important than it is now, given the unprecedented actions that we are taking. And we need to ensure that our parliaments, our media, and our civil society are able to play their role. In that context, High Commissioner, I'd like to thank you for your statement just now and for your role and that of your office, the role that they're playing in ensuring that we do not lose sight of the international human rights frameworks and considerations that we need to take into account as we respond to this crisis. Your independent voice at the apex of the United Nations system of human rights will be vital in helping to ensure that as we battle this common enemy, we don't inadvertently take a step backwards on human rights and the hard-won progress we have all made in recent decades. Thank you, High Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now hand the floor to the Ambassador of South Africa, to be followed by Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, go ahead, Ambassador.
Yes, you can hear me. I'd like to thank you and the High Commissioner and the Bureau for creating an opportunity for us to regroup at a very difficult time. My deepest condolences and that of my country for the loss of life by all countries at this difficult stage, and also our prayers to those that are stricken by the pandemic, and our full support to the Office of the High Commissioner and the Human Rights Council for the work that both must do at this critical time. For South Africa, how we see this is that COVID-19 is about human rights. It's affecting all human rights in their indivisibility and their interdependence. This is a moment where our beingness, it is about us as human beings and being, and how we interact with each other, according each other dignity and respect. So it is fundamentally about human rights. The question is, how do we brace ourselves to be able to emerge from here and create clear markers with respect to the frameworks that we have and the values that are fully established as embedded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Yet at the same time, as we respond, ensure that we observe conduct that is affirming of our human rights. As we speak for developing countries, the very ground on which the 2030 agenda is being implemented has shifted fundamentally, radically. But that is just not the case only for developing countries, for developed countries as well. We are all going to be challenged monumentally. And bearing in mind that the 2030 agenda, inherent to it are human rights. The question is, how do we brace ourselves to begin, because we don't even know what the baseline is going to be. We therefore appreciate the reminder by the High Commissioner of Article 2 in the International Convention on Social and Economic and Cultural Rights, of the importance of solidarity and international cooperation. From the beginning, South Africa could not have taken any other path, but a path that is founded on respect for human rights and is pro-poor. That was based on consultations drawing on the rich tapestry of civil society in South Africa that is providing inputs, but at the same time is monitoring with the media, keeping an eye and constructively guiding government as a friendly force. We're ready to share our experiences, particularly with regards to the justiciability of rights. Civil society is taking our government to court to say, what about income support for women as we speak? The question is then to the High Commissioner, how do we enable countries to ensure that citizens can access rights in courts, even at difficult times, but also at ordinary times? We would appeal to the High Commissioner for some work to be done on global public health as a global common good, particularly with respect to vaccines, respirators, and the critical things that are usually needed in situations of this nature. It's unconscionable that we could even be thinking that these might be patented and held by others. But at the same time, we also need to understand an emerging tendency that is worrying of state piracy of health equipment and things that are required for to save lives. Here's what I would propose to the Human Rights Council. The apex in the multilateral system, more than ever, we need multilateralism now. It seems to us, the South Africans and me, that we need a major regrouping globally to create a common understanding and reaffirm what we know of human rights, the guidelines that we have in place. It might be that post-recovery, we think of a summit to come together and reaffirm. Somehow the human spirit needs to be rallied and cohered back to its humanness. And this is, I think, what we would think the Human Rights Council might wish to consider. It's probably too long term. And to finish, we would urge the Human Rights Council, the Office of the High Commissioner, to intensify its work on racial stereotyping and scapegoating. We're very grateful for this opportunity. We look forward to more and thank all who participated in it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador. Before handing the floor to the next speaker, who is the Ambassador of Pakistan, I would like to say first that owing to the generosity of the High Commissioner, we'll be able to go on and accommodate all the speakers who applied on time. But I would now appeal to all speakers to keep their interventions short so we can actually listen to everybody. Having said that, I will give the floor first to the Ambassador of Pakistan, then to Liechtenstein, and then to Japan.
Thank you, Madam President, for organizing this informal virtual meeting. We support the High Commissioner's focus on 5 areas in the context of COVID-19, which is an unprecedented global crisis of our times. We agree this challenge can only be countered by solidarity and compassion. We would like to make 4 points. First, Pakistan has deployed its resources to the fullest to mitigate the COVID-19's health, social, and economic impacts. We have rolled out a relief package of nearly $8 billion for emergency medical supplies and social protection of our people who are in most need and at risk. This package includes rupees 12,000 direct cash transfers to 12 million individuals and families. Secondly, but unfortunately, the COVID-19 contagion is accompanied by a hate pandemic being transmitted with lightning speed through social media platforms. Offensive hashtags and short videos are stigmatizing minority communities and individuals based on their religion or belief. These troubling developments, including in our own region, are of direct human rights concern. The rapid proliferation of online hate speech needs to be monitored, and those actors which either promote or tolerate it must be held to account. The social media companies must also respond to these serious human rights concerns in a timely manner. Thirdly, in terms of High Commissioner's call for supporting the vulnerable people and groups, we wish to draw attention to the pre-COVID-19 human rights abuses of the Kashmiri people, which have exacerbated amidst this pandemic. According to Indian newspaper Economic Times, Indian occupied Kashmir is among the highest COVID-19 case density area, which is around 6.14 cases per million. Only yesterday, 33 cases of COVID-19 were recorded in a single day in the occupied territory. Instead of preventing this public health crisis, providing relief to the Kashmiri people, lifting the digital clampdown and releasing thousands of political prisoners, the Indian government issued the so-called Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Order 2020 on 15th March. Under this unlawful order, India, taking advantage of the global distraction, changed the residency and domicile laws to allow Indian nationals to acquire Kashmiri citizenship. This is yet another brazen attempt to change the demographic structure of the occupied territory. We urge the OHCHR to continue to monitor the human rights situation in Kashmir amidst this pandemic and call out attempts at changing the demography of the occupied territory in persistent violation of UN Security Council resolutions and international law. We endorse your call, Madam President, not to lose sight of our responsibility to promote and protect human rights in these difficult times. We value your endeavor to work through the constraints of COVID-19 pandemic. Finally, I wish all colleagues and their families safety and good health in these challenging times. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now turn to the Ambassador of Liechtenstein, followed by Japan and then Egypt.
Thank you, Madam President, for giving me the floor. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of Australia, Canada, Iceland, New Zealand, Norway, Switzerland, and my own country, Liechtenstein. We would like to thank High Commissioner Bachelet for her update provided during this meeting on the impact of the current COVID-19 crisis has on human rights. We agree with the High Commissioner that the international response to COVID-19 pandemic must be guided by solidarity, cooperation, and the rule of law. The protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms must be the basis on which measures to respond to the crisis are taken. Any limitation of these rights and freedoms must be consistent with the principles of legality, necessity, and proportionality, as well as in accordance with the international law obligations. Moreover, any restrictions of rights and freedoms may only be taken in a temporary and supervised manner. We would like to reiterate that any measures taken by states to address the COVID-19 pandemic should be holistic and aimed not only at ensuring essential public health functions and universal health coverage, but also at protecting the most vulnerable without any form of discrimination. Strong democratic and accountable institutions are essential for an effective and equitable response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which cannot serve as a pretext to undermine the international and national rule of law or human rights standards. We furthermore emphasize that the timely dissemination of accurate, clear, and evidence-based information is essential for an effective response to the current crisis and helps to address and prevent discrimination and xenophobia, which feed on misinformation and fear. We express our full support to the call by the Secretary-General for an immediate global ceasefire in all corners of the world. We furthermore commend the Secretary-General for calling for measures to address the horrifying global surge in domestic violence directed towards women and girls. It is most important that states provide protection measures for victims and communicate about how those affected can get assistance. We would also like to welcome that the UN General Assembly has sent a strong message of solidarity and cooperation on 2 April this year by adopting the resolution Global Solidarity to Fight COVID-19. This provides a sound basis for the General Assembly to take further decisions to address the operational needs of the United Nations. We would like to conclude by thanking the many people working at the front lines in the health and social sector, particularly the women who account for up to 70% of the workforce in this field, thereby crucially contributing to addressing the COVID-19, often under very difficult conditions and under a high risk of getting infected with the virus. Madam High Commissioner, what would be, from your point of view, the best support that an institution such as the Human Rights Council could provide to your office in the current situation? I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I will now give the floor to Japan, followed by Egypt, and then Cuba. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, for taking the initiative. Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you. I'm afraid the camera is not working, but I will continue. Thank you, Madam President, for taking this initiative. We are facing an unprecedented crisis due to the current pandemic. To defeat COVID-19, global solidarity and international cooperation are needed now more than ever. Japan has provided assistance amounting to $136 million to international organizations for their activities in Iran and neighboring developing countries to help them fight COVID-19. In addition, Japanese government has adopted a supplementary budget proposal, including additional support through UN agencies for approval by the Japanese Diet in the coming weeks. While combating the pandemic, we should ensure full respect for human rights. As we deal with this incredibly difficult situation, it is essential to ensure freedom of expression and the press and to prevent all forms of discrimination, stigmatization, domestic violence, and child abuse. We must protect vulnerable people and groups seriously affected by the pandemic and people most in need of support. In this context, Japan expresses its firm support to the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the UN Secretary-General, underlining the importance of protection of human rights in their recent statements. Madam High Commissioner, thank you for your comprehensive briefing. We are interested to see what sort of measures member states should take in order to prevent and redress human rights violations in the context of fight against COVID-19, including addressing all forms of discrimination and stigma. Secondly, we are also interested in what OHCHR are thinking in terms of concrete support to member states in relation to the human rights related issues in our fight against COVID-19. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to the Ambassador of Egypt, followed by Cuba, Indonesia, and Nepal.
Thank you, Madam President, for organizing this briefing. I would like to thank the High Commissioner and her office for their continued engagement in such difficult times with states, UN agencies, and different stakeholders to mitigate the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on human rights. I fully agree with the High Commissioner that such engagement has to follow a holistic approach that takes into consideration the effects of the spread of the pandemic on human rights, including the right to life, work, food, education, and access to medicine, and other related economic rights on different segments of the society. I would like to ask Madam High Commissioner to elaborate a little bit more on how her office can contribute to the effort to ensure that response plans developed by the UN system include recommendations to mitigate the effects of the pandemic, in particular for developing countries suffering from limited resources and healthcare capacities, and what measures to be taken to alleviate the heavy burden of foreign debts. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now pass the floor to Cuba, followed by Indonesia, Nepal, and Chile.
Thank you, Madam President. We welcome the High Commissioner and thank her, the Office, and the HRC Bureau and Secretariat for their efforts during these challenging and unprecedented times. We highly appreciate the High Commissioner's recent statement and those by several special rapporteurs on the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. This is something that many delegations have mentioned this morning before me. The High Commissioner and her office must assume a leading role in promoting a resolute international call to end all unilateral coercive measures, particularly in this context. It's essential to strengthen the efforts in enabling the environment of solidarity and international cooperation. This is a collective call, much needed in the face of this unprecedented global crisis, which affects all countries and peoples of the world. The tightening of the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the United States government against Cuba constitutes the main obstacle to the development of our country, and is a flagrant violation of the human rights of the Cuban people. Thus, Cuba will continue to denounce the US blockade in the most vigorous, firm, and categorical way. Maintaining and intensifying these measures under current situations in which the world faces a pandemic with devastating effects on life, health, and development globally deepens the genocidal nature of this policy by undermining our country's ability to face the situation. Just to mention an area of special sensitivity, the blockade makes access to reagents, medicines, and equipment necessary for the diagnosis and treatment of COVID-19 considerably more difficult and expensive to Cuba. It further hinders our possibilities to receive and provide international assistance. In spite of that situation, I would like to recall that Cuba has sent 14 specialized medical brigades at the request of the same number of countries, made up of almost 600 health professionals. These missions, which belong to the International Brigade of Doctors specialized in disaster situations and grave epidemics, Henry Reed, join the tens of thousands of Cuban health professionals who were already serving international cooperation missions in dozens of countries. In this regard, it is condemnable that the United States government, instead of ending the blockade, dedicates itself to attack countries that practice solidarity and international cooperation. We conclude by ensuring the full support and cooperation of the Cuban delegation with the joint efforts to address the current situation. Thank you, Madam President and High Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Cuba. I now give the floor to Indonesia, followed by Nepal, Chile, and Tunisia.
Good afternoon, Madam President, High Commissioner, Excellencies, and colleagues. I hope that everyone is in good health. I thank Madam President for your leadership in organizing this virtual informal conversations. I thank you also and High Commissioner for your responses to the question posed. Despite these difficult times, let us continue to be optimistic and hope that we can all get through this crisis together. A united response amongst nations and relevant stakeholders is needed. The takeaway from our conversation today is that our work, our Council, holds one of the keys in resolving the COVID-19 crisis. We should continue guaranteeing the right to an adequate standard of living and combating stigmatization, xenophobia, and racism. Moreover, as has been the concern in many parts of the world in today's difficult and challenging situation, we should show our collective support and acknowledgement to the role of human rights defenders, namely the doctors, nurses, and other health providers, as well as those who are in the front lines of providing support to their communities during the COVID-19 crisis. Now, to follow up High Commissioner responses, we would like to seek your views on the following. First, on human rights trend emerging from the pandemic, as also raised by Ambassador of Azerbaijan and Brazil, particularly on how the UN human rights mechanism support further the World Health Organization's work in ensuring that as medicine and vaccine are developed, they are shared equitably with all countries and people. Second, how has the work of the Office of High Commissioner at country level and regional offices been affected by the current crisis? Do you foresee an adjustment in the priority programs of your offices? To conclude, we attach great importance of ensuring the work of the UN mechanisms and democratic practices in today's setting. While our mechanism address concerning COVID-19 response directed toward the duty bearer, we must also continue to educate and address those who choose not to adhere to the legitimate government measures, those who spread misinformation, and those who harass and attack the patients, medical personnel, as well as law enforcement authority in the response to the COVID-19. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now pass the floor to the Ambassador of Nepal, followed by Chile, Tunisia, and then Armenia.
Madam President, thank you very much for convening this informal conversation with the High Commissioner. At the outset, we wish to convey our thoughts and prayers to all those affected by the COVID-19. Madam President, we're truly living in the extraordinary situation and witnessing the disruption in our daily lives in the wake of the pandemic. While navigating through this difficult situation, we underscore the critical need for compassion and cooperation, understanding and solidarity at all levels to weather out this global crisis. Coordinated response among countries, UN agencies, and all stakeholders is a must to defeat the virus and its knock-on effects. We underline the importance of sharing good practices of national response measures and also of providing support to developing and least developed countries in terms of critical medical supplies and strengthening public health infrastructure and health services. We appreciate the High Commissioner for a comprehensive presentation and also placing emphasis on ensuring the respect of human rights of all, including vulnerable groups, while undertaking response measures. We wish to stress in particular that in the wake of lockdown, migrant workers away from home and families are desperate in obtaining information about critical access to healthcare services, food, and ways and means to grapple with the loss of jobs and confinement. It is extremely important that all migrants have equal access to public health responses and basic social protection measures, including emotional support without discrimination. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Chile.
Hello. Yes, Madam President, thank you very much for this important initiative, and also High Commissioner for your words. I would like also to use this opportunity to thank all the health workers, doctors, nurses, and medical workers for their hard work, sometimes within personal risk during this time of crisis. Madam President, we are in front of a crisis that opens us an important challenges on how to protect and promote human rights and fundamental liberties in front of the necessity of improve the health situation. For Chile, it's important to maintain and expand the international cooperation and solidarity to defeat this pandemic. In that sense, I would like to mention two important initiatives that Chile has been participating. First, in this globalized world, there's no solution that it doesn't go with more cooperation and solidarity. In that sense, within the Americas, ProSur has been doing some work through video conference among their head of states and health authority exchanging good practices. Second, I would like to mention a recent accord agreed with Chile and countries in the region and the Asia Pacific to maintain open trade, especially for essential goods needed for this health crisis. There's no excuse to weaken multilateralism in this moment. In this globalized world, there's no solution that doesn't go by with more cooperation and international solidarity, always by the hand of protecting the basic rights and fundamental liberties, especially to those in the most vulnerable position. Finally, Madam President, again, I would like to thank you for this initiative and also the High Commissioner for her presence and her words. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now pass the floor to Tunisia, followed by Armenia, Ukraine, and Maldives. Tunisia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't know if you are hearing me. Thank you. Let me first thank you for this initiative to exchange views on the current outbreak of COVID-19 and its implication on human rights around all over the world. We welcome the High Commissioner and take this opportunity to express Tunisia's sincere appreciation for her tireless efforts and her office and staff hard work in order to better protect human rights and support governments in this exceptional moment. In that regard, we commend the High Commission letter addressed to the different last March 31 and reiterate our full support for any measure that can improve the well-being of individuals all over the world. We further support the High Commissioner call for world leaders to act with solidarity, cooperation, and care. And we share Ms. Bachelet's view that no country can effectively combat this pandemic on its own. This crisis poses a global threat to our collective humanity and demands a coherent, effective international approach that respects international human rights and that leaves no one behind, because this fight is in the heart of human rights, all of them. Madam President, Tunisia adopted since the beginning of this crisis many measures and concrete steps in order to stem the pandemic and contain its negative social and economic impacts in line with human rights standards. In that context, I further would like to recognize the important role that civil society continues to play in supporting people in these crucial moments. I would like also to reiterate our country's full support for the United Nations Secretary-General COVID-19 Global Humanitarian Response Plan, and for all efforts being undertaken by all international bodies. And in that regard, we affirm the Tunisian President's proposal to the UN Security Council, as we are a non-permanent member these 2 years, of a resolution calling for urgent international action to curb the impact of the coronavirus pandemic as it becoming a threat for peace and security to all the world. Finally, we encourage international community to join this initiative and unify efforts to address this pandemic causing untold suffering for yet vulnerable people and loss of human beings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now pass the floor to the Ambassador of Armenia, followed by Ukraine, Maldives, and then we'll try again with Bangladesh and Australia. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Madam President, I would like to join previous speakers in thanking you for convening this timely meeting, and we extend our gratitude also to the High Commissioner for valuable insights. Madam President, we would like to share your observation that we are facing probably the biggest challenge of our generation. The pandemic of this magnitude does not respect borders, and it requires non-discriminatory, compassionate, united and genuine concerted efforts to tackling it, not leaving anyone behind. And there are already several examples of such approaches. In this regard, we would like to, we would appreciate to learn the views of High Commissioner on two issues. First, the UN Secretary-General made a call on immediate global ceasefire in all corners of the world, while humanity focuses on the true fight of their lives. Armenia wholeheartedly supported the call. In this context, we wonder if the OHCHR is following the instances of incitement to hatred and intolerance that can lead to violence, and what measures can be taken to ensure that the COVID-19 crisis is not taken advantage of for promotion of hatred. Second, many countries introduced emergency laws in order to be able to counter the spread of the COVID-19. Is there any preparatory work carried out in this moment to provide states with guidance on how to protect human rights while dealing with this emergency situation, and how the member states can contribute to the work of the office to this end? Finally, I wish good health to all colleagues and their families. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I pass the floor to the Ambassador of Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, thank you first of all for your very timely initiative to hold this virtual unofficial conversation with Madam High Commissioner. Our delegation appreciates the presentation of today made by the High Commissioner. Ukraine, of course, stands for global solidarity to combat the spread of the pandemic of COVID-19. Our delegation has fully endorsed the UN Secretary-General's call for a global ceasefire amid the COVID-19 pandemic. We support the work done so far by the UN Secretary-General, High Commissioner, to enhance much needed cooperation among the UN member states as well as the international organizations to curb COVID-19 and mitigate its effects. Ukraine also endorses the call by the UN leadership to address the issue of health emergencies and focus on social impact and economic response. At the same time, a dire humanitarian situation caused by the spread of the pandemic has not to be exploited in order to escape international legal responsibility. We think that the High Commissioner's idea to hold, as soon as the situation allows, the special session dedicated on COVID effects on human rights is quite pertinent and has to be thoroughly considered by the UN member states. During the last weeks, there have been numerous calls of the UN human rights system representatives, including the High Commissioner, heads of treaty bodies and special procedures mandate holders, to protect human rights in the circumstances of fighting COVID-19 pandemic. In the nearest future, the world may face new challenges of this kind. Should we perhaps start to think about elaborating some guiding principles on protecting human rights while countering pandemic diseases or in emergency situations? And actually, I have one more question to the High Commissioner on how the OHCHR field missions cope with the circumstances of spreading the COVID-19 pandemic in delivering their mandates. Many, if not
all such missions have monitoring of human rights situation in a country, region, or territory among their primary tasks. Even before the pandemic, the issue of unimpeded access for monitoring was pertinent for a number of them. So to what extent the restrictive measures aimed at fighting COVID-19 spread amplify the existing problem of denied access for monitoring? I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now pass the floor to Maldives, followed by Bangladesh and Australia.
Thank you, Madam President. Maldives appreciates this arrangement for a virtual informal conversation with Madam High Commissioner today. Let me first express deepest condolences to the countries that have suffered most and lost thousands of lives to COVID-19. Madam President, Maldives acknowledges the areas of concern that Madam High Commissioner had highlighted: protection of the most vulnerable groups, including women, children, and migrant workers, as well as equal access to healthcare for all, and the social and economic implications of COVID-19 pandemic. The government of Maldives has implemented several policy measures to defeat COVID-19. We have closed our borders, stepped up healthcare responses, and launched economic stimulus and relief packages. We are doing all we can to protect human rights of our people in our COVID-19 response plans. Maldives places great emphasis on transparency and to keep the public well informed of the situation of COVID-19. Our priority is to promote compassion and care at this crucial time. Maldives is working closely with bilateral and regional partners in addressing this crisis, and we thank them all. Madam High Commissioner, I thank you for your leadership. We need your voice to be heard constantly on emphasizing the much-needed human rights approach to COVID-19. In conclusion, let me emphasize the need for compassion, cooperation, and solidarity. Maldives stands by them all. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I now pass the floor to Bangladesh, and I hope we'll hear you.
Thank you, Madam President. I hope I'm heard finally, and also to the Bureau for organizing this timely information session on COVID-19 pandemic. We very much appreciate Madam High Commissioner's introductory remarks and her letter last week. The COVID-19 pandemic has left almost no part of our lives and no part of the world untouched. It will likely have profound transforming impact. Madam High Commissioner, the unprecedented efforts being made by states to save lives and to provide succor to the affected brings me to my first point. The foremost priority should be to forge a robust global response to contain the outbreak and to protect the health of our people, including the elderly, children, persons with disabilities, and the migrants who are the most vulnerable. Second, measures to be taken fast to protect the right to food, with a special focus on the most vulnerable in view of the looming food crisis. To that end, to keep global food supply chains functional and mitigate the pandemic's impacts across the food system. Third, to ascertain how the post-pandemic economic shocks will affect the right to work of our people, particularly the rise in unemployment and underemployment in developing and the least developed countries. Fourth, in view of the reports of incidents of racism, xenophobia, hate speech, and discrimination, we need to act swiftly and combat the stigma, including by using mass media, social networks, in order to expand public awareness of human rights. Fifth, perhaps the only silver lining to the COVID-19 pandemic is what it might mean for the climate crisis. We believe much can be learned about how the pandemic affected the climate and how the ways of responding to the COVID-19 might influence our common fight against climate change. Finally, this global problem calls for a coordinated response, no doubt, through a very strong global platform of solidarity, as the High Commissioner said. If the Council is to play in it a constructive role, we should avoid divisive tendencies and act accordingly. Madam President, in conclusion, we condole all deaths and sympathize to all those who lost their near and dear ones, wish everyone good health, and commend the doctors and the health professionals around the world for their unparalleled service, and dedication. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now the Ambassador of Australia, and after that we'll start with NGOs, starting with Civicus.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me this time. Thanks very much for your patience. And Madam President, we thank you for organising this, and also warm thanks to the High Commissioner for her briefing and her leadership, which is so important in focusing on the human rights dimensions of the COVID-19 pandemic. Like many countries, Australia has introduced domestic and border measures to slow the spread of COVID-19. These proportionate and temporary measures are saving lives. And while we accept that certain restrictions may be necessary in the face of this pandemic, it is more important than ever that states comply with their international human rights obligations. As we've seen today, emergency measures can disproportionately affect those in vulnerable situations. So the increased risk of domestic, family and sexual violence and impeded access to essential services for persons with a disability are just two such examples. National human rights institutions and civil society have a particularly important role to play in monitoring the impact of emergency measures. States must ensure that emergency measures are necessary, proportionate, transparent, non-discriminatory and temporary. Australia condemns the actions of some states in taking advantage of the pandemic and the global community's attention on COVID-19 to undermine human rights or subvert democratic or judicial processes. Some states appear to be using emergency measures to silence any form of dissent, including whistleblowers, and to intimidate and imprison journalists. Lockdown measures have been used to target LGBTI persons and also religious minorities. Australia is concerned for the health, safety and well-being of those unjustly detained in prisons around the world during the COVID-19 pandemic. We call for the release of all prisoners unjustly detained or with humanitarian cases for clemency, including those who have been detained on the basis of religion or belief. We join other states too in passing on our sincere condolences and our enormous gratitude for the work done by public health officials, health workers everywhere, and thank you once again for providing this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and I'm very glad we could sort out the technical problems. We now pass to the list of speakers from NGOs, and we have 4 on the list. We start with Civicus, followed by the International Network for the Protection Against Elder Abuse, Asia Forum, and ISHR. Starting with Civicus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, High Commissioner. This is a joint statement. As states are undertaking extraordinary measures to curb the spread of COVID-19, we recognize the good faith efforts of many states to effectively protect the right to life and the right to health. However, all responses to the pandemic must be deeply rooted in a cross-sectional, human rights-based approach. We are particularly concerned by states abusively resorting to emergency powers and undue restrictions on fundamental rights, including the freedom of expression and the right to access information. Some governments have enforced internet restrictions and shutdowns that prevent people from accessing vital information. Access to information is critical in the effort to curb the spread of COVID-19. Equally, attacks on journalists and media reporting on government response is of great concern. The freedom of expression needs to be protected in times such as these. High Commissioner, we are there further concerned by the expanding state practice to monitor and closely control people's movements, even at the cost of their privacy. Efforts to contain the virus must not be used to usher in a new era of expanded digital surveillance. We ask the High Commissioner to monitor the situation closely. We further call on member states to ensure all measures adopted in relation to COVID-19 pandemic fully take into account and comply with international human rights obligations. To ease the pressure on prison systems and lower the risk to health of prison population by releasing all human rights defenders and prisoners of conscience who were imprisoned for their human rights activities. To pay special attention to traditionally marginalized or vulnerable groups and to ensure access to appropriate support, resources, and protection mechanisms. To ensure any use of surveillance to track the spread of the virus is limited in purpose and time abides by strict and explicit human rights safeguards, and guarantees the right to freedom of expression. We thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now pass the floor to the International Network for the Protection Against Elder Abuse. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this important discussion. I am speaking on behalf of 12 organizations working with older people. While we appreciate the recognition by the High Commissioner that older persons are at particular risk in the COVID-19 pandemic, both in terms of morbidity and mortality, older persons face particular threats to and abuses of their human rights. We are extremely concerned that the current crisis is highlighting existing ageism and age-based discrimination that are a daily reality for many older persons and are reflected in policies and actions across different sectors. We would like to ask Madam High Commissioner, how is OHCHR including the rights of older persons in the guidance it provides and in the capacity building and training activities by its field offices? How does your office ensure that the rights of older people are consistently and systematically addressed throughout all UN responses? We are committed to work with your office to ensure that the voices and experiences of older people around the world are included. With many thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. The next speaker now is the Asian Forum. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a joint statement. We thank the High Commissioner for her update. We urge states to cooperate with her during this crisis. Effective international cooperation and assistance will be essential to stemming the tide of this pandemic. States and international institutions must use all available resources to respect, protect, and fulfill economic and social rights. They should ensure that those who are most marginalized and at greatest risk are protected. States must protect the right to health. They should ensure that health services and goods necessary for prevention and care are accessible, available, and affordable for all. Health workers and other frontline workers should be provided with adequate protective equipment, information, training, and psychosocial support. States should ensure that intellectual property regimes do not impede access to vital medicines and vaccines for populations in need. States should provide emergency accommodation to people who are homeless. They must also take measures to protect people from being made more vulnerable to COVID-19 because of a lack of housing. Measures taken by states to address the pandemic can have adverse impacts on the right to food. States must ensure that the right to food is guaranteed. People in precarious forms of labor, the majority of which are women, are more likely to see their rights to and at work adversely impacted. States must ensure everyone has access to social security protections as well as economic support. States should identify the impact of certain restrictions on people's livelihood, which could then impact a range of rights and mitigate these to the extent possible. Faced with school closures, states should explore innovative and accessible ways to provide access to education and ensure adequate levels of financial support for those that need it. In situations of conflict and occupation, it is critical that governments ensure full and unimpeded access for humanitarian and medical aid. We urge states to recommit to working together towards a more just world, to tackle underlying inequalities and ensure the full respect and fulfillment of rights without discrimination. This helps make us more resilient and better equipped to prevent or address another such crisis. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And now, last but not least, the International Service for Human Rights.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a joint statement. We thank the High Commissioner and Human Rights Council President for their leadership in convening this briefing. We hope this will be the first opportunity of many to share good practices, address violations, and provide a forum for discussion. This is a much-needed regular activity for the Council while the formal session is suspended. We call on the Council Presidency to continue examining possibilities to ensure that the Council is able to discharge its duties despite the crisis, including addressing violations. We urge you, Madam President, to ensure that civil society participation is not restricted and to meaningfully consult with civil society on participation modalities. The Council should convene a special session on the impacts of COVID-19 on human rights once feasible. The Council should reaffirm human rights as central to states' responses to the crisis, including by providing leadership and sending a clear message, this is not the time for business as usual. There should be a zero-tolerance policy for gross and systematic violations and any abuse of the current crisis to crack down on human rights. The crisis needs a multifaceted response by the OCHR and the Council's mechanisms. The special procedure should continue to work together to provide clear guidance to states, respond to violations, and address the impacts of COVID-19 in their upcoming reports in a coordinated manner. Certain groups are more vulnerable, more at risk, and are more acutely experiencing the impacts of both COVID-19 and emergency measures taken by governments. For example, measures taken increase women's and girls' vulnerability to violence, exacerbate the feminization of poverty, and put further pressure on women and girls in their caretaking roles. We welcome the focus by the High Commissioner on special procedures regarding marginalized groups and populations, and urge them to continue issuing guidance and recommendations highlighting the specific impacts and necessary action. This is critical to ensure that no one is left behind. As the UN works out how its mechanisms can operate virtually, new and increased risk of reprisals could emerge. Relevant mechanisms, including this Council, must remain vigilant about attempts to intimidate and attack those who engage and must respond immediately. Human rights must be central to the UN's response across the board. The crisis makes the implementation of the UN Secretary-General call to action even more urgent. The SG should push for the immediate release of human rights defenders, journalists, and indeed anyone arbitrarily deprived of their liberty or disappeared for exercising human rights. We'll submit the full statement to upload on the extranet. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And now I really have to thank the High Commissioner very much for her generosity, for still being with us, for having listened to everybody, for all her patience. And
thank you, Madam President, and I thank all of you. First of all, it's good to see you healthy, in good conditions, and I thank you for the many very interesting and thoughtful questions. I have tried to group my responses, but I may not be able to do justice to all the questions now, but I will thank you for your understanding. Many have asked about the office, the functioning, how it has been affected by the crisis. Well, on Monday and Tuesday, I had virtual meetings with all the regional office, country office, and also human rights advisors on some many of the missions in different parts of the world. And I would say, by and large, OHCHR is mostly operational. However, travel restrictions and nationwide lockdowns have inevitably impacted our work in some areas. And our field presences are, of course, also affected by the crisis, as all are facing movement restriction limiting usual operations. And also, if I may mention, because many are women, they have, and their school are closed, they have to work, care for the children, the elderly. I mean, I'm talking about staff as well. But we have been working, giving them the facilities so they can continue work, but also take care of the ones they should take care of. In areas where internet is not fully available, OHCHR is still communicating through the use of phones, satellite phones, and other technologies. Even though many of our activities have been postponed for now, for example, conferences, workshops, or trainings, some have been done online using remote technologies. We also continue with our engagement with our partners, being it governments, national institutions for human rights, UN country teams, civil society remotely. And as a matter of fact, many have asked, how are you ensuring? Well, on one hand, with the guidance that we have issued, the statesmen, the ones that the special procedures have done as well, the treaty bodies, we have, all my colleagues were telling me that they were so useful in the work with governments, but also in the mainstreaming on human rights on the UN country team response and support to the government. This has required, of course, adjustment in methodology and in programming. In terms of programmatic work, we have identified 6 priority areas: engagement in support of vulnerable groups and people, focus on supporting participation and inclusion, access to information, supporting the UN system response through integrating human rights, and we're participating in so many different activities and so many different instances with the UN system. Engaging, of course, on economic and social impact, rights impact, ensuring respect for all human rights within the COVID-19 crisis, and supporting UN human rights mechanisms to contribute to the COVID-19 response. OHCHR field operations continue to carry on their activities directly when it's safe and feasible, and remotely when there's no other alternative. For example, interviews with victims and witnesses are conducted increasingly by phone or video chat, rather than in person. And on-site visits only take place when physical distancing rules can be fully observed. Some field offices can be able to carry out rapid assessments, missions of the impact of COVID-19 and related prevention measures on vulnerable groups such as Roma, homeless persons, and older persons. The office continues to apply its same methodology for preparing reports, gathering and verifying information for a variety of sources, analysis of information, and making findings where OHCHR reasonable ground standards of proof is met. While site visits have been reduced, remote monitoring and interviews via phone and video chat have increased. Offices also continue to collect and analyze records and official documents available online, as well as other open source information. Equally, we continue to meet our reporting obligation of the dates for the Human Rights Council June session, nor the General Assembly has not been postponed for the moment. Therefore, deadlines for reports nor for requested input cannot be postponed. If we have any problem, we will comment to you. What can states do to support the office? Please continue to share good human rights compliant practices in your national crisis response strategies. Widely disseminate, make use of, and translate the guidance and tools we are issuing in local languages. Provide feedback on our products so we can continue to improve. And also give us maximum flexibility in the use of extra budgetary resources so we can adapt our programs to the 6 key priority areas during the crisis, which I mentioned earlier. In terms of special procedures, specific travel activities by special procedure mandate holders have been postponed, but our office continues to provide full support for their work. And my office is in constant contact with mandate holders and their coordination committee to adapt to the evolving situation. You have seen that special procedures are particularly active in their advocacy work, calling for a human rights response to the COVID-19 situation and offering tools and guidelines to guide national action in fighting the crisis. The work on report and on communications also continues. On treaty bodies, I would like to share with you some information. On elections, it is my understanding that the President of the General Assembly, in consultation with the General Committee, sorry, but it's not coronavirus, it's my throat, it's an allergy. Well, the President of ECOSOC and the UN Secretariat are looking at different options regarding meetings, including election schedule for June. No decision has been made yet. The ECOSOC Bureau has already decided to postpone the CRPD States Party Conference and the election until the first half of December. ECOSOC also decided to proceed with this decision-making through the silence procedure, including with the CESCR April election, but only for elections of position with clean slates. For elections requiring secret ballot, they have been postponed until when in-person meetings are possible. On the treaty bodies review process, the report of the Secretary-General on the status of the treaty body system and the nexus were published on 10th of January. And the President of the General Assembly sent a letter yesterday to all permanent missions announcing the appointment of Morocco and Switzerland as co-facilitators to report to him before the end of the current session of the General Assembly, mid-September, on the GA considerations of the status of the treaty body system. On national responses to crisis, despite the restriction facing all of us, our field presences have been very active to identify and seek to prevent, mitigate, or address the human rights implication of COVID-19 and of government's response to the outbreak. The office is monitoring the situation globally to identify human rights concerns in the health crisis and government responses, generally with a preventive focus in mind. This is done through data gathering, targeted advocacy, and specific technical advice to government. And it's also demand-driven. I mean, some government have asked us for particular situations. and mainly to prevent overreach on areas such as freedom of movement of expression. We're also collecting good practices, including related to the respect for economic, social, and cultural rights, or on the SDGs in the national response, which will be made public, including by regularly updating our dedicated space on the website. But I can share some good practices that we have collected. For example, measures to mitigate the economic impact and protect the most vulnerable. For example, prohibition of evictions, ensure electricity and water are provided, even if bills are not paid, amongst others. Or declaring protection and assistance to victims of gender-based violence an essential activity, like Spain, extending health insurance for some months, even for those who do not have medical coverage, like Kazakhstan, adopting specific controls for preventing and addressing the impact of COVID on specific groups, such as people with disabilities, homeless people, and young people living in institutions, like Chile, suspending arrest of irregular migrants in Dominican Republic, or extending temporary residence for all migrants and asylum seekers for the duration of the state of emergency, like Portugal. Courts encouraging the early release of prisoners with vulnerabilities and to reduce overcrowding. India, Pakistan, Iran, Senegal, DRC, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and Sudan, to mention some. Extending remote learning to all children due to school closure, including using sign language methodology and other accessible means. In terms of the derogation of a state of emergency, I mean, I think everything has been said, but in response to COVID-19 crisis, states have to take difficult decisions and measures, many of them being restrictions or limitations or derogations. And under their obligations, under the ICCPR, I call on all states to notify the Secretary-General of their derogations. Only 14 states have done so far. International law allows emergency measures in response to significant threats, but measures should be proportionate to the evaluated risk, necessary, and apply in a non-discriminatory way. This means having a specific focus and duration and taking the least intrusive approach possible to protect public health. With regard to COVID-19, emergency powers may be used for legitimate public health goals, not used as basis to quash dissent or silence the work of human rights journalists, defenders, or journalists. OHCHR also keeps track of emergency measures adopted by countries and contributes this information to globally existing tracking databases. As the crisis passes, it will be important for governments to return life to normal and not use emergency power indefinitely. Regulate day-to-day life recognizes that the response must match the needs of different phases of the crisis. The Human Rights Committee has provided useful guidance with regard to derogation, including in its General Comment 29. OHCHR guidance on process and contents of text of emergency law is being published in coming days. In terms of access to people under occupation, sanctions, solidarity, and international cooperation, those enduring armed conflicts are particularly vulnerable to COVID-19 because of their socioeconomic conditions. Access to adequate health care and safe water and sanitation are often limited. This is why the Secretary-General called for a global ceasefire, and I today repeat this call. There has been some places, Cameroon is one place where the ceasefire has been accepted, and in other places it's been announced but not yet enabled. People-centered responses to COVID-19 should be driven by humanitarian and human rights principles. We need adequate mapping in these settings, much more political flexibility and cooperation, and rapid technical and financial support. Now is the time for solidarity and cooperation between concerned states and de facto authorities beyond borders to tackle this collective challenge. It will also be important to strengthen international cross-border dimensions, taking into account sanctions, export prohibitions, and disruptions on the supplies of medicine, agricultural market, and food supply to avoid second-order effects of this pandemic, taking account of the right to development and duties of international cooperation. As you have seen on 24 March, I made a public statement calling for the easing or suspending of sectoral sanctions at this crucial time, both for global public health reasons and to support the rights and life of millions of people in these countries. In a context of global pandemic, impeding medical efforts in one country heightens the risk for all of us. Humanitarian exemptions to sanctions measures should be given broad and practical effect with prompt, flexible authorization for essential medical equipment and supply. Following my public statement, I have already been and will continue to follow up bilaterally with countries that are imposing such sanctions to advocate lifting or easing sectoral sanctions to strengthen national capacities in responding to the crisis, including by ensuring the availability of essential medicine and health care equipment. And it has been reiterated to me that sanctions should not include humanitarian, medical equipment and supplies, and that there are clear information about that. But being that true, the thing is that there has been overcompliance. I've been asked to try to, and I will ask member states that have the concrete information on in which case the sanctions have been really impeding the supply or the medical equipment or the medical care. So I will ask countries that have concrete examples to give it me, because I will insist on countries who are imposing sanctions on the need to lift them. On the economic and social impact, COVID-19 is exposing the dramatic effect of decades of underspending in health, water, sanitation, and housing, social protection, and of policies eroding labor rights and decent work. For example, workers with precarious contracts, not access to paid sick leave, and so on. This is therefore possibly a historic opportunity to advocate for change, for microeconomic choices that are pro-poor and place people's rights at the center, for greater investment in public services and fiscal policies that counter inequalities and austerity. I strongly support the Secretary-General's focus in the most recent report on the socio-economic impacts of the pandemic. His call to build back better is stronger using the SDG framework and place rights at the center of efforts to mitigate the devastating socio-economic impacts of the pandemic, particularly on the most generalized. As part of the UN SDG group, we are contributing to the soon to be launched UN COVID-19 socio-economic response framework and the multi-partner trust fund on COVID-19 response and recovery. My office, in collaboration with the UN system partner, is in the final stages of developing a framework of human rights indicators for UN country teams to contribute to monitoring the human rights situation of the crisis. It is intended to be a data monitoring tool to sharpen our joint analysis of the impact of the crisis on human rights. And one thing that I was meant to mention, I also participated in the Interagency Steering Committee for Humanitarian Action. And one of the issues that we've been seeing, and there is where we're working on, and the UN is working together, the Office of the Secretary-General, the Secretariat, with the organizations that usually do have strong procurement capacities, like WFP, like UNICEF, like WFP, like OSHA, UNDP, etc. And one of the things they're looking at is how our systems work together and ensure the access to the supplies that food supplies that they need. But also one of the problems that we have been seeing is that with these lockdowns and restriction of mobility, sometimes our humanitarian actors have problems to have access to the places they need to deliver either the food, either the health care, etc. Many of you mentioned the crisis being used to incite hatred and intolerance, and the challenge, of course, the pandemic is a challenge like others and affects all humanity. It affects all of us. It knows no distinction by skin color, nationality, belief, or other status. We should all speak out forcefully against the stigma, racism, discrimination, and xenophobia generated by this crisis, particularly against national or ethnic groups, migrants and others, LGBTI, etc. That all eyes turn to our leaders in time of crisis, and they have no greater responsibility than to push back swiftly and publicly against the racism and the stigma this crisis is generating. Because fear and isolation fuel the fires of discrimination and racism. In that context, every word matters, including how we refer to this disease and how we talk about who has contributed to its spread. We see with deep concern a correlation between people in already vulnerable situations and targeted by stigmatization and hate speech, and people affected by the COVID pandemic, including minorities, migrants, older people, people affected by extreme poverty. So the most effective response to misinformation, is accurate, clear, and evidence-based information from sources that people can trust. On non-discrimination and vulnerable group, I think it's critical to put an emphasis on leaving no one behind in the current crisis. This includes addressing deep-rooted and intersecting forms of discrimination and inequalities across our societies, which are being magnified and likely to be exacerbated in the course of the pandemic. We have observed the stigmatization and discrimination of marginalized groups, including, as I mentioned before, elder people, persons with disabilities, LGBTI persons, refugees, migrants, homeless, and others, who are being made scapegoats in many societies. They are also likely to be left out of national responses. And our call in every country has been to leave no one behind. Our field presences also work closely with its UN and other partners to ensure the inclusion for vulnerable groups. For example, in Kenya, it is bringing slum dwellers together with government officials to discuss access to water and sanitation. People living in poverty are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Some response measures have far-reaching consequences on the human rights of people living in poverty and low-income groups. People in precarious employment lack job security, guaranteed wages, paid leave, or social security. They often face an impossible choice of continuing to work at the risk of infection or losing their source of income by following quarantine measures. People who will not be able to work are at serious risk of losing their homes. Lack of access to adequate water and sanitation facilities and services create a vicious cycle for the poor, as they have limited access to healthcare, other necessary services, and goods to treat the infection. The economic crisis will also impact more on food availability, given the globalization of food systems, commodification of the sector, and potential reduction in food subsidies in response to challenging economic time. Children are at particular risk in terms of access to food, exacerbated by school closings. In response, economic stimulus packages should go beyond simply bailing out businesses and banks, and should take into account the most vulnerable by, for example, including wage subsidies and rent stabilization measures. The situation faced by indigenous minorities in remote and rural areas is also of critical importance. Measures are urgently needed, including by local governments, to prevent COVID-19 outbreaks in communities that have not yet attained of the virus, especially in terms of sanitary conditions and access to health care. Older persons have faced particular risk to COVID-19, including potential age-based discrimination in access to medical services. In this time of physical distances, we also need to pay particular attention to older people so that they are not isolated and neglected. OHCHR is working with its partner to issue human rights guidance on COVID-19 and older people in the coming weeks. We would appreciate receiving examples of good practices that can be shared through such guidance. In relation to persons with disabilities, containment measures need to take account of the needs of people who rely on the support of others to live their daily lives. States should put in place additional measures to guarantee the continuity of support of people with disabilities throughout the crisis. Access to additional financial aid will also be crucial for people with disabilities and their families falling, as many depend on services that have been suspended and may lack the resources to stockpile food and medicine or pay for home delivery. Migrants and refugees have faced particular risk as they may be confined to camps and settlements or living in urban slums with overcrowding, poor sanitation, and overstretch or inaccessible health services. International support is urgently needed to help the host countries step up services both for migrants and for local communities and include them in national surveillance, prevention and response arrangement. It is also vital that any tightening of border controls, travel restrictions or limitations on freedom of movement do not prevent people who may be fleeing from war or persecution from accessing safety and protection. We have just issued specific guidance on the protection of migrants during the crisis. In terms of specific human rights concerns to the crisis on gender, well, we have mentioned already that health crises like the COVID pandemic affect everyone, but they impact men and women, girls and boys differently many times, often exacerbating gender inequalities. The Secretary-General is going to release a report soon on the gender impact of COVID, to which we have contributed. Targeted measures to lessen the impact of the crisis on women are needed. Caregiving roles of women and girls in the home put them at greater risk of infection. Women may face disproportionate risk in the job sector as well, especially in the informal sector, may be the first to lose their jobs and consequently not have social security, health insurance, or paid leave. And many women, when the closure of markets that are needed, maybe as measures for the health containment, for women who work at the market is really a desperate situation. Older women are more likely to live in poverty, which may in turn exacerbate the impact of the virus and limit their access to goods, food, water, information, and health services. Economic and social stress and lockdown are resulting in drastic increases in domestic violence. So states need to take urgent measures to ensure the safety of women and children. And some good practices that we have recorded is declaring gender-based violence-related services as essential, like in Spain, Portugal, and New York State in the US, expanding availability of alternative accommodation, like in Italy or France, putting in place accessible, diversified, and proactive system to alert authorities and protect victims, like in Spain, France, Uttar Pradesh state in India, Ireland, informing victims about available services like in China, Costa Rica, Uruguay, Mexico, and Portugal. But also, my office guidance is forthcoming with recommendations to integrate gender in COVID responses, from addressing gender-based violence to mitigating impact on health, including sexual and reproductive health, the economic impact, and the impact on girls' education. And one important point is women's participation. In past emergencies, health emergencies, the lack of participation of women in such decision-making space has led to gaps in response to their specific experiences, situations, challenges, and requirements. Examples from around the world suggest that the situation is no different in the current crisis. The voices, expertise, and experience of women must be fully incorporated into global health priority surveillance, detection, and prevention mechanisms. On detentions, persons deprived of their liberty are amongst the population with higher vulnerability to COVID-19, often because the condition of their detention or imprisonment. It is difficult for them to exercise physical distancing. Also, their access to hygiene and healthcare are frequently restricted. My office and WHO issued on the 26th of March a guidance note on COVID-19 and persons deprived of their liberty to assist states in considering measures to reduce the risk of spreading COVID-19. Prisoners with heightened vulnerability to COVID-19 are at particular risk and should be considered as a priority for release. For children, equally, their best interest will almost always be released in these circumstances. Prisoners close to end of their sentence should be considered for early release. In some cases, factor weighs in favor of ongoing detention, where a person is guilty of serious crimes or poses a clear danger to others on release, for example. And for some sick prisoners, treatment in prison medical facilities can maybe medically most appropriate than discharge in an uncertain environment. Greater use of alternative to pre-trial detention, commutation of sentences, early release and prevention, alternative measures to immigration detention is also encouraged. On the right to health issues, on the question of access to life-saving treatments, we consistently advocate for non-discrimination in access to health care. At the same time, we understand that the reality is that doctors are having to make difficult triage decisions on a daily basis in the current crisis. In some countries, triage plans have been adopted to address the question of who gets treatment first when resources are limited. The well-known safeguards against making decisions on the basis of discrimination, stereotypes, and assumptions about the relative value we can ascribe to individual lives are crucial and provide a touchstone for arriving at these decisions. In the same way that human rights provides guidance while leaving states a margin of appreciation in policy development and implementation, the same norms provide clear parameters while allowing professionals the space to make medical decisions based on medical criteria. On digital issues and technology, health monitoring includes a range of tools that track and monitor the behavior and movement of individuals. And I have advised that such surveillance and monitoring should be specifically related to and used for public health specific aims and should be limited in both duration and scope as required in the particular situation. Robust safeguards should be implemented to ensure any such measures are not misused by governments or companies to collect confidential private information for purposes not related to the public health crisis. We have also advised that any application and policies put in place to trace contacts must be legitimate, proven to work, voluntary, transparent, and respect the right to privacy. Only the minimum required data should be gathered and kept while respecting anonymity and personal IDs of users. All policies and use of applications should also have embedded time limits. On focus on children and technology, the right to education has been disrupted for millions of children around the world as schools have closed down. And there is a risk that resulting education inequalities exacerbated during this pandemic, particularly for children in poverty, children living in remote locations, and for children whose family is losing income as a result. Alternatives to digital education should be put in place, using radio, television, books, and hard copies, resorting to more traditional means of education when necessary. To end a more different note, we could also say that the COVID-19 pandemic also presents an opportunity to address long-standing inequalities, including access to education for children. And emergency resources now being made available to address the pandemic should also include technical capacity like internet connections and basic computer equipment to connect marginalized communities, targeting families with school-age children. On civic space and civil society, we believe that the participation of the civil society is key. Now in the response, but also in an eventual recovery, we need innovative thinking on how to maintain and strengthen civil society participation at all levels through flexible channels for remote participation, video conferencing, privacy respecting, cost-effective and accessible online platforms. This is also very much true for the Human Rights Council itself. Can COVID-19 help the Council to adjust our working methods to ensure we're able to bring in civil society from all corners of the world in a more affordable and representative way? Continued funding to civil society organizations, especially human rights defenders organizations, is important in light of the risk of donor funding being diverted from critical human rights work to service provision. Protecting those who speak up, emergency laws should not be used to further restrict their space or seek to silence those who speak the uncomfortable truth. Recognizing the important roles of human rights organizations, human rights defenders, and journalists in detecting gaps and shortcomings in national local responses will accelerate the turning of the crisis. In the current situation, we need accurate and timely information to flow more than ever. And finally, on threats against freedom of opinions and expression of journalists that Representative Astra mentioned, the epidemic is unfortunately being used by some states as justification for cracking down on opposition and criticism. Poorly defined new criminal offenses such as misinformation about COVID-19 are used to punish critics or journalists cite dysfunctions in healthcare structure. In many countries, threats to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly are emerging. Restricting legislation on social media and on the publications of fake news are being used to bring cases against online activists, political opposition, health workers, and other citizens. My office has documented the arrest and detention of dozens of individuals in several countries. In others, there has been increasingly aggressive cyber policing and online surveillance resulting in erasing critical information online, as well as detention of journalists and government critics and expelling foreign reporters. I'm also informed that the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression will submit a report to the June session of the Council focusing on these issues. And finally, access to justice in times of crisis that the Ambassador from South Africa asked. Well, courts become even more important than ever to safeguard rights in times where major decisions with broad impact are being taken and implemented at great speed. In these circumstances, we have already seen the real risk for abuse of power, legal overgeneralization, and mistake. The courts must remain available to address these issues, if necessary, of course, by modifying their working methods. And we have seen courts in many countries taking measures to ensure they remain accessible whilst protecting their staff and clients. I hope I have covered the majority of the questions, and of course we'll always be available to continue working with the Human Rights Council as you consider necessary. Thank you very much, Madam President, and all the excellencies and colleagues and friends.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner, for having answered all these questions. As you have seen, it was a very rich debate. This brings us for the time being to the end of this meeting. I would like to thank you very much for your analysis, for your participation, and I would also like to thank all delegations for having participated. On a personal note, I'd like to say that I think this was a challenge, but I think it was worth our effort. What I take home is that we covered a lot of very pertinent and interesting questions which we couldn't fully discover, which is what encourages me to say that I will try my best to organize more such informal meetings, ideally some kind of informal panels, which would allow us to invite 2 or 3 speakers, for example, from among the special procedure mandate holders. What we're in now is somehow a large-scale social experiment with tremendous impact on the human rights situation. What gives me personally hope is that there is a lot of solidarity amongst all of us, regardless of our usual ideological and political divisions, because we all know this is about lives which are at stake, and in particular the lives and the livelihoods of the most vulnerable populations. Some of the issues we have to deal with at short notice, but we also have to keep an eye on the longer term implications. After the crisis, there will be a very complex situation, and there might be a risk of seeing supposed emergency measures becoming a fixture of life when in fact they shouldn't. So there is still a lot on the plate for the Human Rights Council. I thank you all very much for your participation, the High Commissioner, of course, but also UNOC, all the IT services, and I was witness of how difficult it was to organize this, conference services, the HRC Secretariat, and all of you. I thank you for your participation, and I hope to see you again in the near future at a similar event. Goodbye and all the best to you.
The recording has stopped.